This isn't random chaos. This isn't some ancient, unavoidable war. The car bombs, the shattered cities, the black flags of extremists. So much of it traces back to a single moment. A moment when two men, with a map and a ruler, drew a line in the sand. A line that has been bleeding for over a century. How did this happen? How did a secret agreement, forged while World War I raged, ignite the very conflicts that define our world today? To understand the bloodshed, we have to go back to the lie that created the modern Middle East. Before 1920, there was no Iraq. For centuries, the lands we know by that name were part of the Ottoman Empire, governed as three separate provinces or vilayets: Mosul in the north, Baghdad in the center, and Basra in the south. Mosul was mountainous, home to a large Kurdish population alongside Arabs, Turkmens, and various Christian and Yazidi communities. Baghdad was a bustling, diverse Arab metropolis, run by a Sunni elite. Basra, on the Persian Gulf, was a predominantly Shia Arab port with deep ties to what is now Iran. People's identities weren't national, they were local, to their city, their tribe, their sect. A merchant in Basra probably felt more in common with a trading partner across the Gulf than with a Kurdish farmer hundreds of miles away in the mountains of Mosul. There was no single Iraqi people, because there was no single Iraq. It was a mosaic of communities, governed with a light touch from distant Istanbul, existing in a balance that had held for hundreds of years. But World War I was tearing the Ottoman Empire apart. And in the halls of power in London and Paris, two empires saw their chance. The story begins in secret. While the Great War was still raging, two colonial bureaucrats, Britain's Sir Mark Sykes and France's François-Georges Picot, met to decide the fate of the Ottoman Empire's Arab lands. Their governments had promised independence to Arab leaders for revolting against the Ottomans, but the Sykes-Picot Agreement revealed the devastating truth. It was a classic colonial land grab, carving up the region into zones of British and French control to serve their own imperial interests. When the Bolsheviks in Russia discovered and published the secret treaty in 1917, the betrayal was laid bare for the world to see. The promises of Arab independence were a lie. After the war, at the 1920 San Remo Conference, this secret deal was made real under the guise of mandates from the new League of Nations. France was given Syria and Lebanon. Britain was given Palestine and a brand new creation, Iraq. Britain's plan for Iraq was brutally simple. It was all about the oil. Huge reserves had been discovered in the northern province of Mosul. Under the original Sykes-Picot plan, Mosul was meant to go to France. But Britain had occupied the territory during the war, and they had no intention of giving up the oil. After intense backroom deals, Britain got its way. San Remo formalized the decision, and Britain took the three old Ottoman vilayets, Sunni-led Baghdad, Shia-majority Basra, and oil-rich, diverse Mosul, and smashed them together. It was an act of geopolitical Frankenstein. Three distinct regions with different histories, economies, and cultures were now fused into a single, artificial state. To rule this fractured new entity, Britain imported a leader. They installed Faisal from the Hashemite family as the Sunni king of a majority Shia country, creating a power structure that put a minority in charge from day one. The borders were drawn with a stunning disregard for the people on the ground. The line with Syria cut right through tribal and Kurdish communities. The border with the new Kingdom of Saudi Arabia was defined not by geography, but by the location of desert wells. Every line drawn was a future fault line. The state of Iraq wasn't born, it was manufactured for the benefit of the British Empire, and it would be held together by force. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The history of modern Iraq is a story of conflict erupting along the very fault lines created in 1920. First came the uprisings. The 1920 Iraqi revolt saw Arabs and Kurds, Sunni and Shia, briefly unite against their new British rulers. It was brutally crushed, setting the tone for decades of instability. The British-installed monarchy struggled to build a nation from such disparate parts. It ruled over a state where a Sunni elite dominated a Shia majority, and the Kurds, once promised their own state, were now a repressed minority in a country they never asked to join. Formal independence in 1932 changed little. Britain kept its influence and military control. The political system became a revolving door of coups, culminating in the 1958 revolution that overthrew the monarchy. The decades that followed saw a line of strongmen, each using more brutality to hold the fractured state together. This cycle ultimately led to the rise of the Ba'ath Party and its most infamous leader, Saddam Hussein. Saddam's tyranny was, in a dark way, the logical endpoint of Iraq's creation. His power was built on a brutal formula: force-fed nationalism and the ruthless suppression of anyone who stepped out of line, especially the Shia majority and the Kurds. The state was so fundamentally unstable that only the most extreme violence could stop it from shattering. Then, in 2003, the US invasion did just that. By toppling Saddam and dismantling his government, the invasion removed the one brutal force holding the country's fragile pieces together. The power vacuum it left wasn't empty for long. The sectarian tensions Britain had baked into the system in 1920 exploded into a vicious civil war. In this chaos, an even more terrifying force emerged. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by Sunni extremists, fed on the turmoil. They found fertile ground along the porous, artificial border between Iraq and Syria, a line that was now a highway for jihadists. This group would evolve into ISIS. Their goal was explicit: to destroy the legacy of Sykes-Picot. When ISIS captured a border crossing in 2014, their propaganda showed bulldozers smashing the sand berm separating Iraq and Syria. Their leader declared the end of Sykes-Picot. They aimed to erase the colonial borders and build a caliphate unifying the Sunni heartlands of both countries, a terrifying, twisted version of the Arab state promised a century before. ISIS thrived on the exact grievances created in the 1920s, exploiting the anger of Sunni Arabs who felt powerless. The fight against ISIS has left cities in ruins, but the underlying problems remain. The border is a contested mess. The ghost of the colonial mapmakers haunts every conflict. From the British Mandate to the rise of Saddam, from the sectarian bloodbath after 2003 to the genocidal campaign of ISIS, the pattern is clear. The fake borders drawn in the 1920s were the original sin. They created a state that was unstable from its very first day, a nation where identity was fractured from the start. The wars of the last century were not some eruption of ancient hatreds. They were the predictable, tragic, and violent result of drawing a line on a map without a thought for the people who lived there, all to serve the interests of a fading empire. That line in the sand, drawn with a ruler in a distant capital, has been rewritten over and over again in blood. And the people of the region are still paying the price. If you want to understand the hidden histories behind modern conflicts, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. Understanding the past is the only way to make sense of the present. Thanks for watching.